Welcome to Bluefish Radio. I'm your host, Lawrence Gunther. Bluefish Radio is a show about the future of fish and fishing in Canada, so you will have the skills you need to become a steward of your favorite fishing hole. Welcome everyone back to Bluefish Radio, and this episode is being recorded with video on, so if you want to watch it on YouTube, go to the Bluefish Canada YouTube channel where you will find this Bluefish Radio episode. Otherwise, you'll be listening on audio over all our broadcasters like Apple and Google and so forth. And I've got three guests with me today on this really, I think, exciting episode of fly fishing, people who love fly fishing, but more than that, people who understand the connection between mental health and mental strength, mental recovery, and what fly fishing can do for all of that, right? You know, we've got Morgan McLean here. He's a guide, a former guide, and he's a competitive fly fisherman that represents Canada. We'll get more into that in a bit. We've got Paul Michael White. He's a noted therapist and author. And we're going to start with my daughter, Alexandra Euteneier, who is a certified psychotherapist. She has a master's in spirituality, counseling, psychology, philosophy, and is a big proponent of understanding the connection between outdoors and positive mental health. Hey, Alexandra, welcome to the podcast. This is your first time on this podcast.
I know. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's about time. We've had you on the other podcasts, and but this is
that was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Alexandra's also a cold water swimmer, so we were down at the lake on Thanksgiving, and she went swimming. And I think, what was it, 12 degrees?
Around there, yeah. It wasn't too cold, but
yeah. Everyone else thought it was just fine too. No one else was swimming. We were all cheering for Alexandra.
It was unexpected. Yeah, it was nice.
Alexandra, why don't you introduce Morgan and then Paul, and then we'll get started with some questions.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so Morgan McLean is a member of Fly Fishing Team Canada. He represented Canada and Scotland in July 2023 at the Commonwealth Games. He came first place at Quebec Fly Fishing Provincial Championships in 2022. He's a certified fly casting instructor with the FFI since 2001. And so he's taught fly casting since the age of 16. He's a board member at the Franklin Trout Club and was a professional salmon, steelhead, and trout guide for 15 years in British Columbia. He's represented Canada at the World Fly Fishing Championships in France in 2002 and has had the opportunity to fish many places throughout Canada, the US, the Caribbean, South America, and even a little bit in Europe.
And Morgan just came back from northern Argentina, where you were at.
Northern Argentina, yes.
Golden Dorado. That's going to put a smile on anyone's face.
It did.
Oh my goodness. Well, we'll get back to that in a bit, but introduce Paul for us, Ali. And
okay. So Paul Michael White is a professional speaker, a mental health counselor, a teacher, and an avid fly fisher. With a master's degree in counseling psychology, he works with people to create better personal and professional results. And he is an author and published Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada's first ever self-help book entitled Fishing for Reality. It's a collection of his grandfather's life philosophies for successful daily living. He has an ebook as well entitled Stressing Freedom, Work-Life Balance Strategies That Work. And you can download that for free on his website, and a new book entitled Tales of the Great Outdoors.
Tales for the Great Outdoors. And that's how I was connected with Paul, because his publisher reached out to the podcast and said, hey, we got a good fit for your podcast. And we love having authors on. And the only thing I ask is that I'm allowed to get a copy of the book with their actual signature in it, and I can add it to my collection of books that I can't read. But I love to, I look, when I was a kid, I could see a little bit. And with a magnifier, I could read. And I was always down in the library pulling out the fishing books and, subscribing to the magazines. And I was an avid reader. And I understand the strength of beautiful books and pictures and all of that. So I hold authors in high esteem. Paul, welcome to the show, sir. And how's the weather there in Newfoundland?
Thank you, Lawrence. It is cold. since Christmas. It's been 2 months of, I don't know, it's abysmal. How's that?
Wow,
One-
like windy, the usual wind.
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, I enjoyed it. Now I hate it. So, I'm like a black bear. People say, well, go ice fishing. No, I'd rather be eaten by the flies and chased by the bears. So, yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
I laugh at it. It is what it is. And it's great to recharge, I guess, through the winter months. One of those seasons. Yeah, get ready for summer fly fishing.
So what got you interested in writing this new book about, and the books in general about mental health and fly fishing and making that connection? Because it's not something that a lot of people write about. Like I haven't done a Google search on this, but just in my own, life, I've never seen this sort of connection of fly fishing and mental health, what you're doing. And you've dedicated your whole life to this.
Yeah, pretty much. I had a very unique grandfather. He was a skipper on his father's schooner. So they sailed the high seas.
Wow.
And back in the day, his father, so my grandfather was Mike, skipper Mike, but his father, Captain James, come election time, he could sway the vote in the community. They trusted his leadership, and he was the real deal,
Hmm.
and I guess I followed in their footsteps, and, being a helper and, being a person who, would do whatever it takes to help somebody out and push through. And I had a passion for mental health and a passion for fish. So we kind of put it together. And, there's been a few books. The latest one, Tales of the Great Outdoors, that's unique because, I'm one of several authors. There was a group in Newfoundland called the Newfoundland Labrador Sportsman. They had a magazine as well as a TV show. And after COVID, they kind of went not under, but the business folded.
Yeah.
So the editor of the magazine got all his writers that he knew and had connections with, and put a bunch of stories together. I think it's great because this day and age, people less time in front of a cell phone, in front of an iPad, more time out breathing the fresh air and enjoying nature. It makes sense. And I guess it's so simplistic that a lot of times we miss it and we don't even think about it. But mental health, because that's the greatest, I think, Lawrence, the greatest thing is having peace of mind, being happy and being able to do that in nature. It's such a recharge. And, I'm sure Morgan and Ali will agree there's nothing better than in the great outdoors.
I totally agree. And I've know blind people all around the world that love fishing because they get out with a buddy, sighted or not, or whatever, or out on their own. And it's something we're really good at doing. And you just forget about being blind. And the other thing I love about being outdoors is, I depend on my hearing. And when I'm in a house, when I'm in a room, I just hear the echoes off the walls and the ceiling and the windows and everything. And when I'm outside, there's no more echoes. You're out on the water and you just feel tiny and insignificant. And I think that's important, that we're meant to feel tiny every so often, and learn our proper place in the universe.
Keeps us humble. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So fly fishing, do you do other fishing as well? Or do you think fly fishing has an advantage over mental health, the benefits over other fishing?
Well, as the story goes, like I grew up, like I said, with my grandfather. My father got me in scouts, and my grandfather was my mom's father. So, Dad worked with the Americans at the naval base. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so I was kind of his protege. And we did ice fishing, and we did rabbit catching in the wintertime. We did regular trouting too. We called it trouting with a spinner worm. And then this day we drove over the bridge, and it was early June and the Atlantic salmon had opened. And I asked him, Poppy, who are these guys? What are they doing? He told me after the Atlantic salmon. So it started from there. And years ago, his father was a commercial salmon fisherman. So it was kind of in the blood. And you just take it from there. And I just loved it because, like you said, all your senses are activated. The smell of the fresh pollen and foliage as you're walking to the river, the sound of the birds. You can taste the clean air when you come to Newfoundland or go to Labrador.
Oh, yeah.
Sights and sounds, and just concentrating on that fly. That's, I think, the mental aspect of it. When you cast or you do spin cast, you're waiting for the tug. But with fly, there could be a tug, there could be an explosion underneath the fly. you gotta have optimal concentration, and you can't be depressed and concentrate on your fly at the same time. So, I mean, there is a mental health connection 100% there, Lawrence.
Yeah.
And so I just loved it. I mean, it's not for everybody. Some people like, playing guitar. I don't do that, but in this case, yeah, the fly fishing is the one.
Morgan, you're a fly fisherman yourself, and you do this competitively. Look, I fly fish too sometimes, and I know how absolutely stressful fly fishing can be, with no one knows how to cast well. Everyone's struggling to perfect their casting technique. The chance of getting a fly everywhere but in the water is pretty high. And then just catching stuff, absolutely catching stuff. You're not using live bait, so your odds are, somewhat reduced as well. But Morgan, you do this professionally and now competitively around the world. You're really piling on the stress, but you still go back.
I find the opposite. I think today the stress in fly fishing is probably because it's been made a little bit overcomplicated to try to sell gear and have more gear. Fly fishing, it to me is one of the most simplest forms of fishing that you can do. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to be able to cast 80 feet. You basically can take feathers from a bird and attach them to a hook and do well for many different species of fish. So when I think of some of the differences, and I love all kinds of fishing. I like downrigger fishing for salmon. I like jigging for walleye, whatever it is, I like fishing. But one of the things with fly fishing is that there's nothing like presenting a properly well fly cast to a fish with a fly that you've tied, or maybe you've tried to invent over time. It I think brings everything closer. It makes everything maybe a little bit more intimate. I know, I take a lot of this pretty seriously, and the flies and stuff that I use, I tie 95% of my own flies that I use. But to be able to go and tie something like that I've kind of worked on and developed over a while, I'll take it out, I'll look the way it swims, not happy, rechange it, and it starts working right, or it starts swinging through the water right. That's such a cool feeling. I don't really know how you can get that any other way of fishing.
I agree. I think some of my most memorable catches were fly fishing on the streams around, where I grew up, because we never have a lot of lakes. It was all just rivers. And to be able to tie your own fly and go down to the river and catch a trout on your own fly is a real sense of accomplishment. Like you think, wow, so I took a bear hook and some fur and feathers and glue and thread and maybe something little flashy, and I put it together and I glued it, and then I went down the river and I caught something on this tiny, tiny little speck of something,
Yeah. And I think one of the things really that I get in all the years that I've taught fly casting and stuff like that, there's no limitations to fly fishing. When I meet people and it's like, oh, well, what do? You can only fish on the surface, or you can only do this. I've caught sharks below 40, 50 feet in the water on a fly rod. I've caught, fish over 150 pounds on a fly rod. There's no limitations. I mean, carp fishing on a fly is incredible. I don't even know how to explain how incredible that is. And quite honestly, before, carp were kind of thought of as a junk fish to me, and now they're not.
No, carp are tanks, absolute tanks. They're so huge, they're so powerful. It's an absolutely astonishing fish. Paul, I want to get back to you with a question here. What's a dirty bomber?
Yeah, it's interesting how that evolved.
Yeah.
Kind of, when you get so far in life and then you connect the dots going backwards. So, like Morgan mentioned, there is no great, and you mentioned it too, Lawrence, there's no greater thrill than catching a fish on a fly that you tied. So back, 30 odd years ago, when I started first fly tying, there was no internet, there was no YouTube videos to watch. If you were lucky enough, you had somebody who knew somebody who was tying flies and could probably show you. And I got into fly tying. So the bomber was a dry fly. Basically the two main types of flies that we use, say in Newfoundland. I mean, there's all kinds of streamers and nymphs, and there's a whole array of patterns, but the two main types are wet flies and dry flies.
Yeah.
Wet flies, they swim below the surface, they sink, they're wet. The dry fly is on top of the water like a leaf, or however you want to present it. So there was a guy in Nova Scotia, I think, he was a pastor, Reverend Emerald Smith. He threw a cigarette butt on the pool, standing over a bridge one day, and a salmon grabbed it. And he got the idea to tie a dry fly with spun deer hair and trim it, and to make it look like the cigarette butt.
Oh, the goodness. Oh, no.
Yeah. Right. So it got the name bomber. I don't even know how that name came about, but the bomber was the bug with the two tails, one on either end, and a bug was either had no tail or it had one tail. And the bomber, I mean, the orange one, especially for whatever reason, for Atlantic salmon and native brook trout on the east coast of Canada, it is a phenomenal fly. So I don't know. I guess I never lost my creative, my creative juices. So as a kid, I was tying these dry flies, and I didn't know what I was doing, because I learned trial and error, and some of the materials I got weren't as good. And you're young, and you're buying some materials and you don't get the high quality stuff. But what I noticed was these flies caught fish. So over time, it evolved to this creature that it is the most ugliest looking thing you would never even think. If you look at a professional fisherman, and I know Morgan talked about it, simplicity is the key. You don't need the $10,000 worth of gear and look like the cult or the tribe that's on the river. I teach, be your own person, break away, think differently, whatever. But this fly started to catch fish, and so it evolved over several decades. And I use it as a metaphor for life. Seek excellence, not perfection. Go for the results. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the dirty bomber is that. It is dirty and rotten looking, but the Atlantic salmon, it's been tested. We finally released it because we kept it secret for several years. But the most explosive rises and takes you've ever seen. Like they don't mess around. It's
Wow.
So anyway, and it's a life metaphor. It's taken on a world of its own. And if you're fishing Atlantic salmon in Newfoundland, I mean, they all know what it is, and et cetera. So anyway, I just kept that little creative piece of my youth, I guess, and you could never predict how it turned out to be, Lawrence.
It's just a little bit rebellious, isn't it? Like, I mean, you think about all the flies, and I still have books, with thousands of pictures of flies, and they're gorgeous. They're pieces of art, the way they're created. And then you take your dirty bomber and it works well. And that's amazing. It's still fishing, and it's still every sense of the word. It's just a slightly different out of the box approach. And that's really, when it comes to problem solving, sometimes we have to think out of the box. So I love the lesson there. I love your connection, the way you put those two things together.
Thank you very much.
Hey, so you mentioned a mentor, Paul, and it made me think about George Hoare. He wrote the weekly outdoor article for our little local newspaper, Georgetown Independent, and he had a little tackle shop in his basement. And my dad fixed his chimney, and he told me about this guy and had his tackle shop. So we went and knocked on his door. I think my buddy and I were 9 and 10 years old, and we love fishing. We knocked on George's door, and he took us in, and he became our mentors. And he was a big fly fishing guy. He did other stuff too, but he taught my buddy how to tie flies. He thought I would be useless at it because I was my vision disability. I could still see somewhat, but my buddy taught me. So I still learned how to tie flies. And but he really taught us the passion and how to be more successful. He and I think that's so important, isn't it? A mentor can help you from having to relearn the wheel.
Correct, 100%.
And you've had. Yeah, so go on.
My mentor was a grandfather. Like I said, it was extraordinary. I can't explain it. You look on, say, Facebook or social media, and you see some of these quotes and memes, and you hear them. My grandfather lived it in a time before, people were pushing it out there, but they lived it. And I don't know, maybe I'm thinking in growing up with morals and values, and I'm sure they got a lot of it from the Bible and Christianity way back, but they just had it. They were just good people. And fortunately, I was like his protege. And so, I mean, I watched him in action and how he could, meander and solve conflicts, and just, he was a people person. And I think, in life, it's all about relationships. In the business world, we say, language controls the relationship and the relationship controls the business, but it's all about the relationships. In teaching kids, the same thing, how to solve problems. There's a big thing now in schools called social emotional learning. And a big part of that is communication, getting along with others, developing friendships, solving conflicts, but it's all about relationships. And if you don't have it, it's a good skill to work on. If you do have it, it's a good skill to master. Right.
I love it. I love it. Alexandra, when you were studying this, all your years at university, did you find people that you could have as mentors that understood the connection between outdoor health and fitness and mental positive healing and all of that?
At university, not particularly, but certainly because I grew up, being exposed to nature so much, there was a familiarity and an affinity for it. So I naturally would turn towards that and kind of developed my own relationship with nature. And I think I like that, what Paul was saying there about the relationships that we have and how important those are. And so the relationship that we have with a mentor, I have had mentors for sure. They've been really important. I think they're something that's not necessarily valued as much in this day and age. We don't really talk about that, how much our youth need that. But yeah, because we're relational beings. We don't exist in a vacuum. And then this idea of our relationship with nature and how much that's been changing over the last many decades, and with urbanization and the amount of time we spend indoors and not engaging with our hands or not engaging with the natural world, like the amount of time that people are spending on screens nowadays is amazing. The estimate is about 10 hours a day for the average person or less that. So yeah, so I think that it's interesting. I think Paul said something that I liked. He said this idea that it's easy, it seems so simple, the idea of engaging with the natural world, almost too simplistic. I think we undervalue it, but the research is really, growing to support how effective it is, and in promoting mental health, well-being, social interaction, even. It increases empathy. There's increases in empathy or sense of connection with people, sense of meaning that people have after even a few minutes in nature. So it's quite an interesting area of research that seems to be important, so that we can prioritize it and validate that it's a really important part of the human experience.
You were even telling me that doctors are actually writing prescriptions to spend time in the outdoors.
Yeah, isn't that neat? It's yeah, and not many side effects of that. It has a lot of benefits.
Sunburn and chill, sunburn and frostbite. Yeah.
Yeah, be careful. You have to be careful. But yeah, it's low cost, accessible for most people, hopefully, and it's the studies are showing that even a small amount of time can have impacts, like 10 minutes, and can increase happiness. So it's not very much that's needed, but it's certainly, I think we're starting to show that it is necessary, that there is something valuable that we get out of that.
Paul, you talk about, we are sometimes our greatest obstacle, and yet we have to start to think of ourselves as our biggest solution. Now, tie that into fishing and mental health for me. Will you make that connection for me?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing, it's a mental set. It is a mental set, being your greatest obstacle, because a lot of times all the junk that's up here going on in our heads doesn't come true, is irrelevant, and it just weighs us down and bogs us down. And sometimes, you mentioned mentors or friends or a jolt from the universe, whatever you want to call it, it wakes us up and says, like, why? Like, take the 500 pounds off my back here. This is irrelevant. So you look to the solution, and I'm sure Ellie has done a bit of that too, solution focused therapy. And that's the best thing about nature, is because, you don't need to go too deep with it. It's very simple. Just get involved, get active. And so, being your problem solver, I guess, participate in your own rescue is major. No one's going to do it for you. And if you have the capacity and the ability to get involved in nature, to get away from the crowd, to partake in maybe fishing is not for everybody, but there is something in nature for pretty much everybody, whether it's a hike or whether it's canoeing or whether it's just being there on a mountainside or going through a valley, or, some people enjoy hunting, but it's there, but getting involved. And I can't say it enough. Keep it simple. The other thing too, Lawrence, is this, I'll tie this in as well. I mean, I think the greatest challenge of all human beings, whether it's the CEO on Wall Street or the taxi cab driver in Newfoundland or the teacher in Ontario or the actor in Hollywood or the stay-at-home mom in Europe, the greatest challenge, or the kid in junior high, the greatest challenge of all human beings is self-esteem and self-worth, low self-worth. And we got to continuously pump up the tank, because life is going to pound you down and take the good out of you. And it comes in strange packages in all capacities, where the stress and those who you think wouldn't do it. And those who you had no idea that they would ever help, actually help. And so, I mean, life throws you curveballs all the time, but you got to continuously work on your self-esteem. And that's the one thing I teach the kids, find something you're good at and continuously do it. Do more of it. When I started fishing, just like, or fly fishing, just like, a baby starts walking, I mean, it was ugly. You get the cast and hooks are in the ear.
Oh yeah.
Like time those flies, but you keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And, if I'm working with, let's say, a kid now in junior high, I'm not going to focus so much on what they deem as weaknesses. Let's focus on your strengths. I want that self-esteem up. Then you can work on some things that you may not be so good at. Could be science, math, English, whatever. But let's focus on your strengths first. Build up your self-esteem. Then we can tap into some of the other challenges you may have. If you put all your emphasis on the weaknesses, you start with a low self-worth, a low self-esteem. You don't think very much of yourself. The battle is half over before you begin.
Oh man, I tell you, I hear you. Like, I've had some fly fishing guide instructors that just pommeled me, and I just wanted to pack up my rod and go home. Like, really, that's all I was thinking at some point during the day. I said, I just want to go home. This is just not fun. I'm suck at this. It's hopeless. Just let me go home. Stop the pain.
There you go.
But this positive thing, Morgan, I wanted, you have to deal with those days on the water where you got all the weight of the world on your shoulders, the country looking over, as you're a representative on these international competitions, and you're having a bad time. And how do you get through that? Like, how do you get that mental positive thinking back? How do you problem solve your way out of this? And I mean, there's one thing to problem solve and find the right fly or the right approach or whatever, but it's another thing to get back that mental mojo again, right? And get out of that funk and out of that sort of those dark thoughts.
Yeah, they can creep in. I remember one of my sessions in Quebec just recently, we'd started the beat off, and I was sharing a boat with another fella from another team, and he was up 5 fish. I had nothing.
Oh boy.
And I knew at this point, I said, I just had to make the top 3, and I knew I had a podium shot. And I sat there and I started freaking out inside my head. But for me, and this is going to sound weird when you talk about fly fishing, for me with competition, the biggest factor for me doing well are my teammates. My teammates, I have, by saying that you train together, you work together, it's hard to have a team. So when we go to an international event, there's 5 of us competing and we work as a team. If I go to nationals, same kind of thing. There's 5 of us on the team. So if you're going out and you're part of a team where everybody's in it for themselves, you can't succeed. Like when you look at the world championships, the number one teams in the world right now are Spain and France. They're so strong in their team development. Most times when they go into serious competitions, they're more focused on how the team does than how you do individually.
Wow.
And I think if, and I think that's one of the things that's really lacked North Americans in the past, from being able to compete on a world level. And you can be the greatest fisherman in the world. You can think that you know everything, and it's fishing. I mean, so many factors can come up to play and so many challenges. So if we're going to prep for a team, like for instance, when we were in Kamloops last year at Nationals, we worked all winter as a team. We had team meetings, we practiced as a team. So when we got into doing, we had one of our teammates, sorry, it's a long story, but one of our teammates was newer in the competition scene. And he goes, man, I'm just worried. I'm so worried I'm going to let you guys down. I'm so worried I'm going to let you guys down. And my reaction was, no, if you don't do well and you're not confident with what you're doing, us as a team have let you down, because you should be going in with full confidence to say, here's how I'm going to start. These are the conditions that could be changing, and we're going to have setup. We're going to have a plan going in. And really for me, it's about that, being prepared, working together, and having people that you can trust to do it, that succeeds. And
I love it.
I don't think you can be a very high level competitive fly fisherman without having that help and that support.
I never thought of it like that, but you know what? I fish tons of team events, in terms of competitions, and whether on a larger group or just two people on a boat. And fly fishing or any form of fishing is the most selfish. It's you in the outdoors, right? It's just you connecting with nature, and everything else disappears. Even the person at the other end of the boat disappears to a large degree. And then and that sort of bothers me a little bit. And then when people start counting their fish, right? And then they say, oh, that's 6 for me. And they're having a little bit of a tournament against you. They're competing with the person, you as their friend on the other end. And to them, it's sort of important to have that competition, that that's part of the whole fishing game. I think it's tragic that you're going out there to problem solve together. You put two heads together, you got that whole synergy. You're going to have better solutions than two people working in estrangement from each other. So I totally get what you're saying on this. I think we in North America could definitely benefit in fishing, as well as in learning how to do teamwork, to stop being so individually focused when we fish. Paul, is that something you come across as well with your counseling and your work and your research on this?
I mean, my research is pretty simple. Atlantic salmon fishermen a lot of times are quite selfish. I'll say it straight up. Mm-hmm. I don't go. I go to the river to get away from those people. I go to nature. I go with my buddies. I go with a good team. And yeah, and like I said about the dirty bomber, it's don't march to the beat of your own drum. Create your own music. Do your own thing. Break away from the cult or the herd and do your own thing. Now, in the competitive world, which Morgan is in, it's completely different. It's like training for the New York Mets, and I love baseball, but you do need the team approach. I think North America is extremely selfish, and it's and ego-centered. And there are those, though, as Morgan suggested, and he's one of them, that when you have a team approach, you rise that much higher. But it's the individual piece of, catching the first, the biggest, the most, whatever for fishing. We see it all the time here on the East Coast. I just go away from those people, and I live a very happy, I have a peaceful time on the river, because you don't need that added stress, right? And if it's competitive, it's a bit different. But like Morgan said, I mean, it's all in the team, and we'll go back to the simplicity piece again of relationships. It's all in those relationships. And, I think people got to get out of their own way.
Yeah.
Contribute, get out of your own way, and you know, let's do it together, not I'm going to do it and watch me, right? And
Yeah.
that goes self-esteem piece too, which I won't get into, but
That whole hero, look at me, look at the big fish I caught, all that whole bragging thing is such a big part of fishing, right? The whole big catch, personal best, all of that stuff, and social media just, magnifies that. Alexandra, when you're dealing with people and in your counseling and you got someone on your couch or your chair or whatever, it's, you're dealing with that you're really exploring that individual's, personal issues, and you're sort of feeding into that in a sense. But you talk a lot about mindfulness and being in the outdoors in a mindful way. How do you bring mindfulness? What is that in the first place? And how do you bring that into your outdoors sort of philosophy?
Okay, well, I'll answer those questions after. But first of all, I think, it's really important that we address the individual needs there, right? That we are all individuals, and yet the relational needs are equally important and provide us like a sense of connection to the world. So in therapy, you definitely are looking at both of those things, and Paul's mentioned and Morgan as well, these values that are so important to helping us to learn how to live well. I think of therapy often as living well, and learning how to do that it's funny, but it's like something that we don't really always teach our children. This is these are some of the basic things you need to know about how to do the basic living skills. So yeah, and mindfulness, I think, is an important part of that. So mindfulness you can think of it as a practice, and you can also think of it as kind of a natural part of how our minds work, because it's basically the act of paying attention without any kind of judgment of what you're perceiving or experiencing. So you're just kind of coming into your senses, and as well as your kind of internal sensations in your body. And you're just kind of being in that state of awareness, which is interesting that we don't stay in that much. We're often kind of, and Paul said this, our minds are going, all over the place often. And yeah, I think particularly that's probably very pronounced for people nowadays, but there's so much stimulation and input coming in all the time and information. So mindfulness is this way of practicing something very innate to the human experience, which is just to just be here and take in what is in this moment. And yeah, and it sounds simple again, but I like this analogy of it. It's like there's a feast, and the world is a feast, and your experience is a feast. But if you don't actually show up to eat it and to taste it, then you're missing out. And so I think that mindfulness allows us to show up and really be fed and nourished. And the outdoors is a way in which mindfulness is really, it's easier to be mindful outdoors. Maybe it's because it's where we spend so much time in our evolution, but there's also just the beauty and the ugliness. I think that reminded me of the bomber, the idea there's both, and with the mindful perspective, it's neither is good or bad. You just get to appreciate, that both are unique. It's a bit of coming with a beginner's mind, so you get to come fresh and innocent to the world and to experience open.
Yeah. It's easier to teach a young person that's open-minded, or someone new to fishing, than someone who thinks they've got it all sorted out already, and you're just there to bring them to a spot. Morgan, you did guided fishing for 15 years on the West Coast, and tell me about like the importance of bringing someone fishing and getting them onto those fish versus bringing someone fishing and making them have a great day. Like, because you can't guarantee the fish all the time. So how do you balance that?
So that's a great question. So one of the things I always told my guides, that the way I know you're going to be doing a great job is that if you come back to the dock and you've completely gotten skunked the whole day, and those people are coming off the boat and they're super happy and they want to go fishing with you again, that to me means more than them coming back fully limited out, fish all over the place. So I think, I don't want to categorize anything. I think one of the problems when you get into fishing too much, when it gets into the kill mentality, where I had people that I would take salmon fishing and they'd be fully limited out. We'd be going out fishing to do some catch and release, or maybe I'd keep some fish on my license for the lodge. And the attitude is they would land a salmon, let's say a coho salmon that's maybe 1 or 2 pounds bigger than what they have in the freezer. And they'd be sitting there going, well, let's keep this on your license so I can take this one home, and then the lodge could keep the one that's in the freezer. Oh. And I couldn't really come to grasp with that attitude. And you would bring these people in that have just been on the west coast of Canada in the middle of nowhere, where every time you take a look around, it looks like a postcard. And their day is determined by how many dead fish are on the bottom of the boat.
The poundage of fillets they're going to bring home. We
went out, and I'll never forget this. I had this one group, and we were fishing this area for king Chinook salmon, and it was catch and release. And we made it catch and release ourselves, because these were fish that were getting closer to the river. They were going to be eventually, they're in the inlet, they've come from the open ocean, but they're still feeding a little bit before they move into the rivers. So we'd go out there and do some catch and release fishing. Well, at this point, this is where you're getting fish. They're fully mature. And I'll never forget this one group I had. We went out and we put a couple fish over 40 pounds to the boat with pictures. It was an unbelievable day. To me,
huge fish,
huge fish for ocean salmon. So, and plus the ones that were in the 20s and stuff that we released. And we get back to the dock, and our dock people are there, and I'm sitting there just thinking we just had the greatest day I've ever experienced on the ocean. Mm-hmm. And when they're asked, "Oh, how was your day?" and it's like, eh. And I remember I got so mad one time when I said, what are you talking about? Well, we don't have any fish we're bringing home. I lost it. I put my arms up. I had to walk off the dock, go take a walk before I could even begin to have this conversation with them. Yeah. And I think it's a shame. Like, sure, I go fishing, I want to catch fish. When I'm in a tournament, if I'm not catching fish, I'm not podiuming. If I'm a fishing guide and I'm not catching fish, you can only do that so much, and people aren't going to come back to you.
Yeah. But but what you're talking about is the exact opposite of mindfulness, right? When they come on your boat and they just want to collect fish for the freezer, that's totally that's being single-minded.
It is.
And not being aware.
We had in Campbell River each year, there was years ago, there was this mega pod of killer whales that came through, and it filled up pretty much the inside passage. I mean, there are tons of these whales that came through each year. And I remember I had this guy in my boat, and we're out salmon fishing. The salmon fishing was pretty good. All I had to do was go around this island, and we could have seen them starting to go through. And it's a big deal. I mean, in my mind, I see it all the time, but it was a huge deal in my mind. And so I got the radio call from one of my guides, and he's like, "Hey, the pod's starting to come through." I'm like, we're talking like 100+ killer whales coming through a channel. And I said to the guy, I said, "Hey, it's only going to take a little bit of our time. We got to go check this out." And he sits there, he goes, "Nope. We stay, we fish."
Oh my goodness.
We need to keep more fish.
Complete.
I was so disappointed. And I just thought, what a waste. What a waste of an amazing day.
Paul, how do you deal with mindfulness in your work and in your life and what you've evolved over the years? I mean, you must see this all the time when people come from away for the Atlantic salmon fishing, and it's some of the best in the world, right? In Labrador, Newfoundland.
Well, I mean, the Atlantic salmon is in the ocean. It's called king of the sea. And that's just it. It's an address, spawns in freshwater, lives most of its life in the ocean to feed, but king of the sea, and is acrobatic, and it's incredible. The big word mindfulness, I mean, that's a big movement now, especially in education system, in spirituality, being present, clearing the mind out. And, with the fly fishing, especially for Atlantic salmon, in nature, like I described, as you're, and Morgan said too, you're in a place where it looks like a postcard all day, all week. I spend as much time as I can there in the summertime, but people come. I remember having the businessmen from Chicago. I didn't guide them because I don't have my guide license, because that would interfere with my fishing. But I do admire guides. But I met them on the river, and they said, "Yeah, we work hard 50 weeks of the year for those 2 weeks to come here to Labrador, and yeah, you just can't beat it in nature." The thing about you mentioned the opposite of mindfulness and the competition, or it's a unique way to live. It's stressful. Some people can't be helped. It's unfortunate. And my grandfather always said it best, just don't become one of them. And that's the best thing you can do, right? When it's that stressful and that competitive. Now, I mean, it's different, of course, what Morgan's into, where it's a competitive sport. I admire that. I could never do it. I now have a new thing to put on Google and YouTube and see what's going on there with the competitive fly fishing.
I know, eh? Like, who knows about this? Like, we need to understand this more. This is amazing that this is actually happening.
I think it's fantastic, right? But
yeah, me too.
there it is, the mindfulness of peace of mind. I think that's what we all want, Lawrence.
Yeah.
Happiness and peace of mind. And it's our needs. How do we get them met? How do we achieve that? And you got to do it every day. Today's going to be a great day. And I'm going to have a great day today as soon as I wake up, and I have that mindset throughout the day. There's going to be blips in competition, as Morgan talked about. I mean, there's a bit of sports psychology in that too. And replaying the old tapes and getting yourself pumped up and psyched up and yada, breathing, all this kind of stuff, which I'm sure, as a competitor, Morgan would know. And, that's a whole different ball game. But at every day we have to be our own cognitive therapists. We gotta focus on those thoughts, clear them out. A lot of them are junk, and there's no better place to do that than in nature, especially on the water. Fly fishing.
I'm going to ask you guys, each of you, the same question. I'll start with you, Paul. What do you do when you're out there on the water with someone, and also what they want to talk about is their boo-boos and their misfortunes and their horrible boss and their dreadful spouse and their nasty children and on and on and on. And you just want to go out there and have this sort of connection with nature and just be at peace and disconnect from all that. How do you handle that?
You mean like if I meet somebody there, or I take somebody there?
You're with someone and they just turn out to be a nonstop sort of talking about their own boo-boos and problems.
I just wave as far away as I can. No, well, we cross the river and I leave them over there and put earphones in. No, you use a bit of humor. I'm pretty direct. I might, if I know them well enough, I might challenge them and say, is it that bad? You could be over in Ukraine somewhere and really experience horror. I mean, look around. Like we're in a pristine environment. Come on, And if you can change the subject and change the thoughts, and you may have to do that, or hook a fish, hand the person the rod, and then there's no way that these thoughts then can continue. If they got a big salmon on the end of that line.
I love that. Yeah, I love that solution. Just get them a fish on the line somehow, and all of that stuff disappears, doesn't it?
Quick.
Morgan, how do you deal with that when you got someone on your team and you're all supposed to be there in a right frame of mind and heading out, for the day on the water and having good positive thoughts, and someone's just there, completely in the wrong headspace? How do you deal with that?
So I had that happen when we were at nationals, and it got so bad that my teammate actually left and went home. And what happened halfway through, when we were doing our practice sessions, we would be out practicing and he was really, really struggling to catch fish. And the whole negative thing just exploded, right? You could not talk to him. You couldn't do anything. And at that point, I really didn't see anything that we could do to help until he kind of mellowed out. So when we got back there, when he actually came back, because we needed him to come back, because we needed a team of 5. And what we did as a team is we tied him all the flies that were working for us. we took maps out and we said, listen, you're going to be controlling the boat for half the time. Your competitor is going to be trolling the boat for the other. At this point, who cares? Who cares how you place? Just try, just go out and fish. Like, regardless of anything, you're in the middle of Kamloops, BC, fishing trout. How bad could it be? So we did that, and we kind of took apart and worked the maps, worked the fly patterns, and son of a gun, he did pretty good.
So just reset. You just hit the reset button.
Hit the
pretty
reset
much.
button.
Wow.
If I'm working, so if I'm out personal fishing and this is happening, I can't really deal with that too much. And my attitude of walking down, wading a ways down, comes into play. If I'm working and I just see everything going south, you got to keep them busy, and that's where I'll go in and we'll start talking about fly casting,
just
catching
change the
a
topic,
fish,
just changing the topic and bringing them back to here now kind of thing.
And it's hard, but there's nothing better for somebody than catching a fish.
Yeah, I hear you. Even if they're not biting, there's always going to be something to look at some point, right? Where you can focus their attention on a bunch of baby geese or something's a beaver or something. Exactly. Alexander, you must get this. You're a registered psychotherapist. You head out, for a weekend of camping with a friend, and then they just want to start thinking, okay, I'm going to use my 72 hours with Alexander to get 72 hours of free psychotherapy. How do you deal with that?
I'm very selective who I'll go into the woods with.
I bet you are. Yeah.
I really, really love the feeling of being completely alone in the woods. And so the person that I would want to be there with, there's only a few people that I know that they're going to be also able to kind of drop into that space a bit more and be quiet, but we can still engage in stuff, but not bring all of their maybe their busy minds or whatever, however you want to call it, and be able to really appreciate where we are. But yeah, I think it's, this is speaking to this idea that what Paul was saying, we're searching for peace and for well-being. And so we're often kind of looking for ways in which we can get that and achieve that. And we're trying to push away from things that make us feel uncomfortable. That's a real Buddhist principle, that we're kind of torn between this craving to grasp onto something, like catch that fish and have that win and feel like, we did something, and then pushing away from the things that we don't think are important or that bother us. And the idea with mindfulness is that there's like this space of peace that exists, and it's kind of in this sense of acceptance. And so you don't need to go to either of them, which can be liberating to cultivate that way of being in the world.
Well, they say that when you first learn to fish, you just want to catch a fish. You're focused on and then you want to catch many fish, and then you want to catch a big fish, and then you want to catch many big fish, and you start going to tournaments. And then the final phase of loving to fish is you just go fishing, and catching fish becomes secondary. You just want to go out there and be in the outdoors. And I totally get that. I think we all need to encourage our fishing friends to sort of evolve through those different phases so that they can establish that really mindfulness connection with the outdoors. And here's my last question, Paul, for you guys, and I'll start with Paul, is, given the state of nature with all the talk about biodiversity loss and the extreme weather patterns that we've been experiencing more, and climate change and all of that, and now wars and so on, how do you but more the environmental stuff and the when you're out there in the outdoors and there's all this, people think, well, don't touch it, you might break it, you might make it worse, don't take a fish, you could upset the balance of the ecosystem or tip the balance into endangerment. How do you balance that and think about that with your own need of just wanting to be out there and feeling the benefits of being in the outdoors, Paul? Like, how do you balance that?
It's a great question. Well, once again, I'll go back to my grandfather. He was an environmentalist way before his time. And he got me into shows like, David Suzuki and all this kind of stuff this is back in the 80s. And I mean, fortunately, I live in Newfoundland, Labrador. I mean, there is abundance of the great outdoors. However, we look at some of the like Atlantic salmon stocks. I mean, they're in a decline. Now, at the same time, I mean, ours are pretty healthy compared to the rest of the world. It's always a delicate balance, more so now than ever. And I think on this side of the country, I mean, you know, we got to lead by example, and that may mean releasing the fish as many, you know, how many fish do you need, like Morgan said, right? And for example, I'll take the trout salmon analogy. I mean, they're best cooked and best eaten when they're fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that will fill their freezer, and you know, in the spring of the year, they take them and they throw them out and feed the dogs, or feed, you know, or throw them in the dump. Like it's crazy. And you know, we can't go wrong in learning catch and release techniques and releasing the fish as much as we can to protect. And of course, you know, doing our thing, planting trees, and of course being involved in nature. I spend as much time as I can there to get away from society, to get away from people, to get away from technology. And it's good. It's good for me. So it is a delicate balance. I don't have the best answer for you, but what I do is I do the best I can and educate other people. Usually
with the knowledge you got, with the knowledge you've been passed down, and with the other knowledge that you that comes into your possession, you do the best you can, right? What else can people ask for?
100%.
I like that, Paul. Morgan, when you're planning an expedition or heading off for a competition with the team, and then you come across those people that say, well, how can you do that? Like, how can you fish? You know, isn't that, you know, you're dealing with the biodiversity loss, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be, you know, you don't need the food. You know, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the negativity that brings into your, you know, into your realm?
So it's a really good question. And I think we could have a whole podcast just on this answer.
Yeah.
When years ago, when I was a full-time guide in BC, I had 41 steelhead rivers on my guide license. And this is what's really cool with having Paul here, is because I know very, very little about the East Coast of Canada. So what I'm talking about now is steelhead fishing on the West Coast. And I'm sure Paul and I could get into an argument here. Well, I like Atlantic salmon, I like steelhead, they're awesome, both of them.
Yeah.
But out of the 41 rivers that were on my guide license, none of them are open to steelhead fishing that I'm aware of right now.
Because of the loss of the species.
Yeah. It broke my heart. It's why I stopped guiding. I couldn't handle it. My home river I could catch steelhead in it on the fly 12 months a year. I could guide people on it for probably 10 months out of the year. A wild steelhead stream like that is special. And I remember doing when I would row near the end of the season, I would row my customers over and to go and look at like all the big spawners, right? Because you guide the river, you're on it every single day floating, you get to know all the little things about it. And it'd be great. You'd see hundreds of fish, all that. Prime time, my last day of guiding on this particular river, I counted 2 pairs of spawners.
Oh.
And we were in prime time.
Yeah.
That river should have been loaded up on the spawning areas with them.
Oh.
So I guess it's a long answer, but going into competitive fishing, I know there's a lot of people that will not agree with competitive fishing. I totally respect that. I've had my own periods where I couldn't look at that because of what's happened. One of the biggest things with competitive fishing in Canada, the number one emphasis on all of it is conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I hate to say this, if you're a hunter or if you're, you know, a diehard fisherman, like look at the salmon and the steelhead in the Great Lakes system. We wouldn't have any of this if there weren't people fishing and hunting.
Mm-hmm. They wouldn't be there.
The money wouldn't be there. People wouldn't put the emphasis in. So whether you agree with fishing or hunting or not, if you love that time outdoors, it's a lot to do because of what the hunters and fishermen are doing. and keeping out there. So I can't really get into a lot of patients where people are complaining about this or complaining about that. And I'll leave it at one hand is there's a huge, and I don't want to get like political, and that's not my point of doing this, but if you look at fish farms, you can go in and you can see, okay, you got commercial fishermen are going to fight the fish farms. The natives are going to fight the commercial fishermen and the fish farms. The sport fishermen are going to fight everybody. And everybody's fighting everybody. And you know what? Everybody is fighting for the exact same thing. We want to have fish in our systems. We want to have fish in the lakes and the ocean and all that. So when I look at today with what's going on, I can't sit here and think anybody who reads or sees or anything cannot have an appreciation that, hey, if we want to have fish in our ocean, we need to have farming. It's that simple. We cannot support feeding our population with fish. So instead of sitting here and getting into an argument of saying, well, I commercial fish or I sport fish, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. We need to be talking and say, okay, well, we realize any farming you do is going to have some negative impact in our environment. It's whether it's beef, whatever it is. So what we need to be focusing more on now is how to make this stuff better. Not sitting there and saying, okay, well, I do this and you're a spin fisherman and I'm a fly fisherman. Well, I can't talk to you.
Yeah, you need to stop that.
I'm better because of what I do. We both want the exact same thing. We want to go and show up with our kid next weekend and go catch some fish, have some fun. So one of the things that's really kind of hit home for me nowadays is sitting here not arguing about fish farming, not arguing about commercial fishing. We need to be arguing about, okay, we know we need fish farming. How do we make it better? And if we put all of those emphasis of all these other factions fighting and saying, got to do that, you got to, I need my fish and you need your fish, we would have so many better answers. Because whether you spin cast, bait cast, whatever you like to do with fishing, we all want to have that resource. We all
together
need to have that resource.
Work together. I hear you.
And that's where I find, if you take BC, for instance, you got the province that runs the rivers, and you've got the federal government that runs the ocean. Well, like, really, are you going to agree on anything? That fish has to use both. Both have to be equally well for that fish to survive, for a Canadian to use it. So that's kind of where I just, I get so tired of like all the different factions fighting each other and what's right or what's wrong or what's this. It's like, it's all right, and as environmental factors happen, other situations are presenting itself. Like look at the goby populations in the Great Lakes. Well, we have a better smallmouth bass fishery now than we've ever had in our lives.
Walleye too. They just learned to eat them now too, and look at their populations exploding.
Exactly. So I'm looking at it now. I mean, the fish, for instance, the small size of the smallmouth bass that I was witnessing swim by my boat in Lake Simcoe this past year was unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, we had one situation where we put one on the scale and released it that was 6.5 pounds. In that was the little guy in the pot. This is pretty cool, right? So I think we can look and see, like, there's effects, everything's negative, but it's not. Like, we got to appreciate the stuff that's there. So maybe me as being a diehard trout fisherman, well, you know what? I can't fish trout in Southern Ontario mid-July through mid-August.
Water's too warm.
Our waters are too warm. So instead of bitching and complaining or sneaking in and fishing them anyways, well, we have another, how many different species of fish could I be fishing for?
Multiple dozens.
Right. So I think it's just important to keep this in mind. Like we need to compromise and go for the better of all of us for what we want to do, rather than just trying to individual it out and saying like, it's mine. Alexandra,
Alexandra, you were talking about we're talking about people who have fears and worries. But you're dealing with people all the time who have worries and concerns, and it's getting them down. And when you talk about to them about going out in the outdoors, do you ever get some pushback from people saying, well, you can't, because there's problems now, there's with the biodiversity loss and the loss of habitat and water quality issues, and how do you deal with those questions and those concerns?
I think that it is that idea of balance and this is something I've learned from you, Dad, and that you guys were just speaking about, is this idea that engagement in the natural world is so important to its protection, that engagement equals care and interest and investment. And without that, we become detached and we don't value it. So it's a balance of that engagement, that personal pleasure and interest, and those explorations with like those higher values. There's the I and then there's the we, and so helping people to orient around what Paul mentioned, their values, and this bigger picture of like, we're all in this together, and then what can we do, and how does this, what would be the best system, and putting effort into that as well, so that you're doing both. And I think that helps people to kind of relax a little bit and not feel so overwhelmed by these things, which are huge right now, which we know about and are really worrying, and we should feel anxious, right? But we need to also be effective and also be happy, and because happy, healthy people can be more useful, I think, to creating change. So.
Love it. Paul, last word to you, sir, and then we'll wrap this up. But where can we find your books, and where can we find you in Newfoundland? My goodness, everything you read about Newfoundland, that everything is still going so well there. I mean, there's so many great places in Canada that are doing, in terms of nature, is doing well, but we don't hear about it often. And I think the book of stories that you've released now, it just is a showcase that, there still is beautiful opportunities to spend wonderful times in nature. But talk to us a bit about, where do we find you? Where do we find this book? And why should we come to Newfoundland?
Oh, listen, you know what? If you come, you won't find me because I hide.
We're going to put a tracker on you, a GPS tracker.
Here's the book, Deals of the Great Outdoors. And of course, the front cover has food. Of course, how can you not like food? There's a big moose on the back. This is a great collection of stories. The editor was Gord Follett. Like I said, he ran the Sportsman magazine.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's talks of there's a polar bear hunt in there now. A lot of people, I mean, it's part of the indigenous culture, but a lot of people, especially in the cities, are not into the hunting and fishing. That's fine. It's not for everybody, but the great outdoors, like I said, does have something for everybody. I mean, I am proud of this book because of the quality of the stories. If you can't go there individually or as a group, do it. You can go there in your mind.
Yeah.
So the great thing about reading or listening to audio. Anyway, I said all that to say, I believe every lodge in this country or cabin should have a copy of this book. It's a coffee table, talking piece, shall we say. I got a friend in there, Jessica. She herself weighs 90 pounds and she catches 40 to 45 pound Atlantic salmon on a barbless hook.
Oh my goodness. Those are huge fish. I didn't know they got that big.
And anyway, so like it's all there. You can find me online, paulwhite.ca. My website is being revamped as we speak. But I do consulting and stuff for businesses. But I'm always happy to chat, answer a question, or, there it is. So
Nice,
I want
Paul.
to thank Lawrence for having us on.
No, thank you, Paul, for doing all the work you're doing, and for putting it in paper and sharing this and the books on your website that people can access. paulwhite.com, eh? paulwhite.ca?
That's it.
.ca. Okay, paulwhite.ca. Sorry about that. Hey, I said you'd have the last word, but Morgan, where can we track the competitions that your team is going into next and the results and such?
So Fly Fishing Canada posts a lot of what's coming up and results. On a lot of the bigger tournaments, they post the results each day.
Yeah.
I'm also in the process right now of revamping my website, which I hope will be out in the next month as well.
Do you have a domain name?
It's risingwaters.ca. risingwatersflyschool.ca.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool.
So, yeah.
All right. And I'll put some of these links in the show notes, you guys. So visit bluefishradio.com and you'll get the show notes, and they'll pop up on, the podcast providers as well. Alexandra, if people want to have access to your services, what's the best way for them to reach you?
They could find me. I work with the Ottawa Therapy Group in Ottawa here, and I do sessions online for those who reside in Ontario. So if you wanted to find me on the website there.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks you guys for spending this time. And I hope everyone feels that it was beneficial to have everyone together like this. I think, man, I was thinking, wow, like we can go all over the place. And we did, and we barely scratched the surface on a lot of this stuff. But I think we just basically opened people's minds to the fact that, mental wellness and physical health and the health of the outdoors, it's totally connected. And I really believe in this whole One Health approach to life, where we take from nature for our lives, and we are responsible to give back to nature to ensure it's healthy as well. That if it's not healthy, we're not going to be healthy. And if we're not, healthy, we can't give back to nature in the same way either. So it's up to us to maintain good mental health, good physical health as much as possible, and to be able to give back if we want to take. It's a two-way relationship. It's a One Health thing, and that's for sure something we can learn from our Indigenous brethren and sisters. That really, it's connecting in all senses, spiritual, physical, mental, developmental, social, ceremonial. It's so important that we do all those things with nature. All right, you guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Lawrence.
Right.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Bluefish Radio. I hope you found the show both entertaining and informative. Bluefish Radio is made possible with the generous assistance from the following supporters. For more information on Bluefish Radio and for more information about myself, visit lawrencegunther.com. Thanks for listening.